From shadows to sanctuary, the inspiring journey of a stray cat who overcomes abandonment and hardship to discover true friendship and a forever home. Follow our brave feline as she begins her life in a dark, forgotten alley, learns about compassion and connection on a city bridge, and finds warmth and belonging on a peaceful farm, in a mysterious forest, at a foggy harbor, through the glitz and grime of a bustling city, across a harsh desert, up serene mountains, and finally returns to where it all began. Watch as each chapter of her adventure transforms her into a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope. If you're ready to be moved by a story of growth, determination, and the true meaning of home, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us on this unforgettable journey. Let's begin the adventure together. Press play and be inspired. Willow was barely more than a shadow in the darkness, a tiny scrap of life hidden behind a rusted dumpster in a damp alley. His short, light yellow fur clung to his scrawny body, dirt speckled from days without a proper place to sleep. A faint drizzle trickled from rooftops above, and every drop sent a shiver through his thin frame. He licked the sparse fur around his chest and tail, his nervous habit, trying to calm the fear that pulsed with every heartbeat. Some distant part of him remembered warmth, maybe a gentle hand once, but now the only proof of kindness came in half-remembered moments, blurred by hunger and the sting of loneliness. Thunder grumbled overhead, and he cringed at the noise, pressing himself closer to the wet bricks. His ears twitched at the shuffle of passing feet. Once in a while, a person would pause in the mouth of the alley, peer inside, then move on. The city never truly slept, but it rarely stopped to consider a trembling kitten seeking shelter. Willow caught the scent of something edible, perhaps a morsel of fish or chicken tossed in the trash, but his fear, fueled by past betrayals, often outweighed his hunger. He hesitated before venturing out, eyes darting from every shifting shadow to the promise of a meal in the open. Still, his rumbling stomach eventually drove him forward, each timid step echoing in his own ears as though it might draw danger from every corner. He froze when a sudden clang shattered the silence, someone tossing a crate onto concrete. Instinctively, he scampered to the nearest hiding spot, a small gap between two trash bins where the stench was nearly overwhelming. His heart pounded so loudly that he could barely hear the footsteps of the stranger. Remembering the time he tried to approach a tall figure for help and been shoved aside with a harsh yell, he cowered until the footsteps faded. Only then did he dare to peek out, trembling whiskers catching the faint lamp glow that spilled from the street. He thought about how comforting it might be to have an arm wrap around him, to have someone whisper, "It's all right." But each time that yearning grew too strong, he recalled the way he had been cast off, left to fend for himself. That memory stabbed him with a fresh jolt of pain and urged him back toward isolation. After a few moments, he forced himself to creep forward again, one uncertain paw after another, chasing the faint scent of food. His eyes, though sparkling with curiosity, also held a readiness to flee at the first sign of danger, like a tiny spark beneath a constant threat of wind. Before long, he spotted a crumpled paper bag near a pile of discarded vegetables. He scurried over, nose twitching as he detected the oily remains of something meaty. With careful nibbles, he devoured the scraps, ever watchful for lurking threats. Each new sound, a whistle of the wind, a distant car horn, the click of someone's boots, made him flinch and check for escape routes. Yet for a moment, the world offered a small mercy, a few mouthfuls of food. Once he swallowed the last bit, he licked his paws clean, hoping to rid himself of the grimy taste. But no amount of grooming could erase the persistent chill in his bones, or that craving for a gentle touch. He settled on the cold ground, flicking his tail over his nose, trying to conserve warmth in the dripping alley. The city might have been alive with energy just around the corner, but for Willow, these walls were the entirety of existence, a cramped, lonely realm he had no clue how to escape. Night turned to early dawn without fanfare. An overcast sky cast everything in a dull gray light. Willow awoke to the muffled sounds of people setting up stalls somewhere in the distance, perhaps a market. With his keen ears perked, he followed the noise, creeping cautiously until he glimpsed a street where vendors arranged their goods. The promise of more food tugged at him, but so did the old fear. He often felt torn between the possibility of kindness and the certainty of rejection. Yet hunger pushed him forward. He ducked behind crates of produce, peering out at the bustle of activity. A man selling vegetables scolded a scrawny pigeon pecking at stray grains of rice. Another vendor stacked fruit in neat rows. The scents made Willow's stomach twist with longing. Then a clang from a pan dropping made him jump, heart hammering in his tiny chest. He retreated behind the crates, nose twitching as he licked the fur on his chest for comfort. He told himself to stay calm. No one had noticed him yet. Inching along the shadows, he finally reached a quieter corner where a cart of fish stood. It smelled so strong and tempting that he felt his mouth water. An old dog snoozed nearby, presumably guarding the stall, though it hardly seemed like a fierce protector. Willow watched, uncertain if the dog would attack. Gathering the courage to inch closer, he soon discovered the dog wasn't asleep at all. One brown eye slowly opened, observing the tiny cat. Willow froze, whiskers trembling, poised to dash away. But instead of snarling, the dog let out a low, gentle sound, almost a polite greeting. "You're a brave one," the dog seemed to say without words, his tail giving a single slow wag. Willow let out a tiny mew, unsure if it was safe to approach. The dog raised his head, muzzle gray with age, and regarded Willow kindly. "Come on," he seemed to suggest, shifting to make room. When a vendor noticed the kitten, he tossed a small piece of fish on the ground. "For the cat," the man muttered, returning to his work. Willow's eyes widened at the free offering. He waited several heartbeats, scanning the area for any trick. Then he pounced, devouring the fish in a matter of seconds. He felt a flicker of warmth inside his chest, not just from the food, but from the subtle proof that not everyone would turn him away. The dog sniffed and said nothing, content to watch the kitten eat. Willow was grateful yet unable to fully trust, so once the food was gone, he drew back a few steps, licking his lips. The dog lowered his head onto his paws again, unthreatened by Willow's presence. Nearby, a wandering artist shuffled across the street, setting up a small easel to paint the morning market scene. Willow's gaze flitted from the old dog to the artist, curious about this new arrival. She had a battered paint box and a serene smile, humming a soft tune. After a few minutes of mixing colors, she noticed the little cat peeking around a crate. "Hello there," she called gently, her tone sweet and inviting. Willow's ears perked, but he stayed in the shadows. She rustled in her bag and took out a scrap of cooked chicken. "You must be hungry," she said, placing the morsel at a polite distance. Then she returned her attention to her painting, as if to reassure him she wouldn't force him to come closer. He waited, pulse quick with indecision. The smell of chicken made his mouth water, and the memory of how easily that fish had disappeared reminded him that he was still hungry. With painstaking caution, he inched forward, every nerve on high alert. Finally, he snatched the chicken and retreated behind the crate again, savoring each bite. The woman glanced over and smiled softly, continuing her strokes of paint. Willow tilted his head, wondering about her. The dog dozed not far away, unbothered. A gentle breeze wafted through the stalls, carrying a mix of scents, fresh fruit, grilled corn, spices, and city grit. For a fleeting moment, Willow felt almost safe. He watched as the artist dipped her brush into a swirl of colors, occasionally sketching a small shape on her canvas. He saw her casting glances in his direction, and once or twice their eyes met. Her gaze didn't hold pity so much as calm acceptance, which was something he'd never quite experienced before. Yet as midday approached, the market grew louder, busier. Shoppers bustled about, vendors pitched their wares, children ran laughing through narrow pathways. Each sudden movement or raised voice sent Willow's nerves jangling. Over time, the artist packed up her brushes and left, giving the kitten one last kindly look. He wanted to follow her, but his own fear weighed him down. The old dog eventually rose to leave with his owner, stiff legs shuffling across the cobblestones. Willow realized that once again, everyone had someplace to go, while he remained untethered. The sun climbed high, warming the pavement. Willow found a quiet nook behind some crates to nap, though he slept lightly, ears pricked for danger. Occasionally, he licked the fur on his tail, trying to steady his fluttering heart. When the sun dipped low and the crowd thinned, Willow ventured out for more scraps. The vendors who noticed him seemed too tired to shoo him away. One man mumbled, "Go on, cat," tossing a piece of leftover fish. Another wagged a finger in mild annoyance, but didn't chase him off. Little by little, Willow pieced together enough of a meal to satisfy his hunger for the night. As dusk painted the sky with orange and purple, the stalls closed and the market people dispersed. The old dog had gone home, the wandering artist was nowhere in sight, and no friendly hand remained to offer comfort or scraps. The hush of evening settled in, and Willow felt a familiar ache of worry. Where to sleep? The brief sense of safety he'd found amid the daytime bustle was fading fast. He slunk back to his original alley, step by cautious step. The city's buildings loomed tall, casting long shadows down deserted lanes. It might have been foolish to return to the very place he'd struggled to survive, but at least he knew its corners and cubbyholes. Perhaps, he reasoned, that knowledge would keep him safe. In the near dark, he crossed paths with a pair of strays rummaging through trash, bigger cats with ragged fur and hardened eyes. They looked at him, but for whatever reason, they let him pass without incident. He sensed luck was on his side tonight. Still, the close encounter left his heart racing. One hiss or swipe would have been enough to send him fleeing in terror. He picked up his pace, whiskers twitching anxiously. By the time he entered the narrow, dim corridor where he'd sheltered the night before, he was exhausted. The cardboard box he'd used was still there, damp and bent out of shape. He curled up inside, tucking his tail over his face to hide from the world. Wind gusted through the alley, rattling loose debris. Despite the lingering taste of fish and chicken, his stomach felt tense, and his mind refused to settle. Images replayed. The vendor's small act of kindness, the old dog's gentle gaze, the wandering artist's gift of chicken. Then the memory of his earliest abandonment seeped in, an echo of a door closing, of footsteps walking away, leaving him in a strange, cold place. He shuddered, pressing his face into his paws. He wanted to forget. He wanted to dream of a warm lap or a soft bed, just for once. In the middle of the night, a loud crash jolted him awake, somebody tipping over metal cans nearby. His heart slammed in his chest, but this time, instead of bolting, he only tensed, waiting. When no threat materialized, he carefully peered out. The alley was empty except for the overturned bins. The clang had already echoed away. He realized with a small surge of courage that he was starting to adapt. Even in this grim environment, he was learning to brace himself rather than flee at every noise. That thought carried an odd sense of triumph. Though fear still gripped him, something deeper inside whispered that there might be more to life than this lonely struggle. He thought of the old dog's calm presence, the artist's compassionate smile, and realized that not everyone would reject him. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for a different kind of future, beyond these grimy walls. By the time dawn broke again, Willow's restlessness had transformed into determination. He had survived another night. His paw pads felt sore from trotting on rough concrete, but he pushed the discomfort aside. In the growing light, he spotted a path leading away from the cluster of alleys he knew. He had never ventured that far. Fear had kept him circling the same shadows, but after tasting a bit of kindness, he wondered if somewhere else might provide a safer haven. Swallowing hard, he stepped away from the cardboard box and moved toward the wider streets. A small voice in his mind warned him of bigger dangers, yet a quieter, hopeful voice insisted he must keep going. With the morning hustle underway, Willow slipped between the legs of hurried pedestrians, flinching occasionally when someone cursed or stumbled. Yet no one paid him more than a passing glance. He found himself drawn down a side street he hadn't explored before, noticing how it curved gently towards a river crossing in the distance. The idea of crossing a bridge felt monumental, like an irreversible step away from everything he knew, but also a step toward possibilities he couldn't yet imagine. He paused at the edge of this street, heart pounding. If he went forward, he might find new perils or new allies. If he turned back, he would remain in the same cycle, scrounging scraps in alleys, waiting on random acts of charity. A cool breeze blew through his fur, stirring something in his chest that felt like courage. He shook out his short yellow coat, licked his tail out of habit, and took a trembling step forward. Though he carried the weight of past abandonment, the memory of small kindnesses nudged him onward. He recalled how the vendor had left crumbs, how the old dog had invited him near without hostility, how the wandering artist had shared her lunch with a smile. Perhaps if such moments existed in one part of the city, they could exist somewhere else, someplace where he might truly belong. He tiptoed closer to the river, ignoring the dull ache of hunger and the faint sting in his paw pads. The bridge loomed ahead, sturdy stone arches reflecting in the morning light. A faint roar of water churned below. Willow hesitated at the threshold, glancing back the way he came. The broken-down alley, the battered cardboard box, the few fleeting hints of kindness overshadowed by nights of fear and cold. Then he looked forward again. He inhaled, mustering what resolve he could. Abandonment had left him trembling and uncertain, but it had also taught him how to cling to the slightest thread of hope. Slowly, he placed one paw on the bridge's surface, then another. Each step resonated like a heartbeat echoing across the calm water. He was still small, still prone to flinching at sudden noises, still haunted by the thought that any moment someone might shove him aside, or worse. Yet he moved forward, step by step across that ancient crossing. The city behind him might remain indifferent, but his spirit refused to surrender. With the sun climbing higher, illuminating the droplets of river mist, Willow felt a growing conviction that he was meant for something beyond the alley's gloom. Maybe he couldn't name that destiny yet, but it tugged at him with a gentle promise. Reaching the center of the bridge, he paused to catch his breath. A carriage rattled by, the driver barely giving him a glance. Willow shrank to the edge, pressing against the thick stone railing, peering at the rippling waters below. The sight made him dizzy, yet it also stirred a strange sense of wonder. The world felt vast, and he was so small, a timid kitten with little more than a wisp of determination. But for the first time since he'd been abandoned, he allowed himself to imagine a future that was more than just surviving from day to day. He thought of a place where he could lie without fear, where a kind soul might pat his head and say, "You're safe here, Willow." That thought warmed him from the inside, driving away the chill that had long resided in his bones. Even if the road ahead held challenges he couldn't foresee, he sensed there was no turning back. He had faced too many nights alone, endured too many echoes of harsh rejection to remain where he was. One final glance over his shoulder confirmed that the alley no longer felt like home. It was merely a dark chapter in a life that had barely begun. Summoning courage, he pressed on, leaving behind the narrow streets and forging a path toward the unknown. And though his steps remained cautious, each one was steadier than the last. After all, a spark of hope can be enough to light an entire journey, and Willow was determined to follow that glimmer wherever it might lead.